Hello, everyone. Scott's Chaos Kings came in paperback. So here we have a nice copy, fresh copy. Scott, you're going to tell us what your book is about?
hmm Yeah, I mean, for people who don't know, Nassim and I go way back. I think running on 17 years now. We've known each other a long time. He was actually his ideas were very informative for my first book, The Quants, which was about how all of these quantitative models really blew up in the great financial crisis. And I kind of used Nassim's framework of looking at things pretty extensively for why that happened. Um, so with my latest book, I figured why not write about the man himself and his longtime partner, Mart Spixnagel. The idea for this book really grew out of what was going on in the spring and summer of 2020. And we all look back, 4 years ago, and it's kind of funny that the Trump campaign is asking us these days to think about, were things better 4 years ago, which I think is quite humorous. We all remember spring, summer 2020. Things were very crazy. We had the COVID pandemic. We had markets melting down. We had all sorts of chaos in the streets, a chaotic presidential election. And at the time, people were really in disarray. But I noticed that two things happened. One was the hedge fund run by Nassim's longtime partner, Mart Spitznagel, Universa, uh, put in these astounding results in the crash. Um, they earned a lot, more than I think. I forget the exact number, 1,000%. Um, you may remember Nassim, but they did very well in the crash. And I also noticed that Nassim and a few of his collaborators in January of 2020 had written a paper warning about the risks of COVID, and what steps needed to be taken to address it. And if you think back at January 2020, not a lot of people were warning or even thinking about the risks of COVID uh, outside of China. I think a lot of people were thinking, well, this might be bad for China's economy. It could have some ripple effects on markets. But beyond that, it wasn't seen as something that most people should be concerned about. Even the World Health Organization was saying, don't get too worried about it. So I noticed this paper, and I was thinking like there's something similar going on between the performance of Universa and Nassim's prescience in worrying about COVID. And there's sort of a way of looking at the world, of thinking about the world, of thinking about risk that is interesting. And I thought maybe we
Hold
could
on.
look into that.
One mentioned the Black Swan warned about pandemics by explaining that our environment is more prone to the kind of multiplicative effects because of connectivity, both
That's right.
economic, physical, and uh, biological. The next pandemic would be worse than previous pandemics, which would go faster. And but everybody
Yeah.
missed that until, of course, the pandemic happened, and they started saying it's a black swan. Ah, no, no, it was in the black swan. It was described as a white swan. Parentheses. Okay.
Right, right. And that's something that one of your collaborators on the note, the January 2020 note, Yunir Baryam had also written about pretty
Yeah,
extensively
yeah, we
over
were.
the
He
years.
was obsessed with. We were both obsessing over Ebola, and people
Yeah,
were not taking the threat seriously. They don't realize that you have to kill a pandemic in the egg, and it's easy to kill in the egg by the traditional measures, isolation of virus, quarantines and stuff like that. But People completely
Yeah.
miss the notion of a multiplicative risk.
Right. Yeah, the exponential
Exactly.
nature of a pandemic, and you have to, as you say, nip it in the bud very quickly. So you've made some pretty extreme recommendations about shutting down borders, cutting off travel, isolating, and it just to me it really stood out as pretty interesting. Now I remember talking to you about it, and you explained to me the origin of this paper, and this is something that we wanted to go through the book chapter by chapter, right? And I think in the first chapter um, of the book, which is called Boom, um, we talk about or maybe it may be in another chapter, but we talk about you told me about how this note was written at the request of the White House.
No,
You had a
we had a friend in the White House
and then yeah.
and having conversation with him about the pandemic. And of course, I don't know if they suggested or we suggested, and it was written not in response to the White House request, but in response to the White House being aware of
Mhm.
ideas concerning such class of events.
Right. The person that you knew was concerned that senior White House officials weren't taking it seriously.
That's exactly
So,
the, yes.
right. Um, okay, so I guess we want to go chapter by chapter, and in the first
I
chapter,
guess that's the most natural thing, but that's how you wrote it.
yeah,
But
right.
feel free to put more emphasis on some parts than others.
Yeah, we can pop around um, as the conversation goes naturally, but I wanted to talk about uh, the view on Wall Street about the universal returns and the claims that were being made in 2020 about these astronomical returns of okay, here it is, 4,000 more than 4,000% gains by the fund. So I talked to somebody Aaron Brown, uh, former AQR risk manager, and he told me that he was convinced that these returns are not possible unless the fund is making some sort of prediction. And as the market changes, as shifts in the economy happen, they tweak the model. And Aaron told me, he says they deny it, but they have to have some kind of forecasting element to it that they don't disclose. You can't make it work without that. Maybe they've discovered the secret of life, but it just doesn't add up. They do it so much better than anyone else.
Okay, so the background there is as you know, Aaron is an expert. He's very um, experienced in risk management and had
Mhm.
noticed that people who engage in our classes of strategies typically don't do as well.
Right.
And and his reason is that there must be some kind of timing.
Yeah.
And my answer is no. There's no such thing as timing. The
I,
structure,
I I know, I know that's what Universa says, and
exactly,
that.
as a principle is there's no timing. You see,
Mhm.
Mark, for example, has uh, often very bullish ideas, but at the same time, they never reflect themselves in positioning. The position has to be the same regardless of the environment. As a matter of fact, it is the absence of timing is a central element because it's like saying insurance. You time your insurance based on your views of the world. You never buy
Yeah.
insurance when there's fire. And if you pre-detected a signal of fire coming, I bet you someone else will eventually figure it out.
Right. And it's for viewers who don't really know the strategy at Universa. Could you just briefly describe what it is
I'll let you
in simple
describe it.
terms?
like according to your book. Let's stick to your
Okay.
book, the way it's described in the
Yeah, well,
book.
Nassim mentioned insurance and essentially what Universe it is, and Empirica, the hedge fund that Mark and Nassim launched before Universa, is it's essentially an insurance portfolio on the stock market. And when there's a major crash, not just a little downturn, but a major crash of 15, 20%, uh, within a short period of time, the positions that the firm buys pay off astronomically. And these are typically put options on indexes uh, or various stocks and other instruments designed to benefit from crashes. And that's all it is. And the firm is constantly adjusting the portfolio through time, but not based on forecasts for a
It's based, I
crash. It's
mean,
constantly trying to
exactly.
reposition.
You're not forecasting events. You are looking at statistical properties and how they diverge from what you think is the pricing. That's the
Yeah,
first one. And the second one is you try to find as partners people who would gain from having such an insurance because it allows them to take more risk. And you find
right.
smart people who do not look at the price of insurance on its own or price or returns of the insurance because it can be a negative price and also positive. But people who look at um, the whole package, in other words, if you think that the market has a lot of potential, you, you can afford to pay more for large
Right.
or large, yes, if you have larger position, more insurance. So it's a
Yeah.
scuffle. And my motto has always been when you buy a car, the insurance is too expensive, you don't buy the car. And if you really need that car, okay, it's a whole package. So you look at it in terms of monthly cost, not in
Yeah.
terms, you don't break out the parts. So the problem comes from the Wall Street traditional separation of mu and sigma. In other words, some people focus on risk return, on risk, the others focus on return. And that is not
Sort of
really
combine the two into one package.
exactly. I mean, it's like trying to separate the left ventricle from the right ventricle. See, so
Yeah.
you can't.
This is something I think I definitely learned talking to Mark a lot for this book, and he kept coming back to it, which is Universa, this strategy, which links directly to the Black Swan concept, which is there's more risk in markets than people generally realize. This strategy isn't a bear fund bet. It's not based on an assumption that there's going to be a crash. And he told me the market could never crash again, and I'd be perfectly happy because what it allows investors to do is to get more exposure to stocks as opposed to the traditional 60-40 portfolios, or 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds, other kinds of risk management strategies, which leave a lot off the table. This kind of lets you put all your chips in. You put a little bit of percent of the portfolio into the Universa crash portfolio, and you're protected against the crash, which is all that really matters at the end of the day. Is those big, you know, Black Monday kind of, great financial crisis disasters. If you can make it through those, then you're fine. The little bit blips up and down along the way don't really matter. Does that sound kind of
Yeah, yes.
right with the, yeah. And it's another thing that Aaron told me is, what Aaron Brown is describing what, your innovation was with Universal was that most risk managers were focusing on the day to day and kind of ignoring the crashes, just
No,
putting those aside.
that's not quite it. Most risk managers have number one a bad background in the statistical method, focusing on fixed fixes to the Gaussian distribution, and
Hmm.
and we
Like
don't.
VAR.
Okay, like anything. No, you can do a VAR outside of Gaussian, and then the second problem is execution. Our business is execution, and more because Mark was a pit trader, I was a pit trader. I was an upstairs trader, market maker. So when you're a market maker, you
Hmm.
realize there's a difference between. I mean, the devil is in the execution.
Right. I mean, I guess that, that would be what set Universa apart from other tail risk hedge funds.
But I think a
Um,
combination of focus on tail, metrics and methods of evaluations, which are completely different from the traditional mean variance approaches that cannot be fudged um, to get to the tail. And we have our pricing formula here, made it public in statistical consequence of fat tails and published in some archive in the journal.
yeah, that book is what's also recommended on Amazon with my book.
Really?
Yeah. None of my books, but that
I
book.
made it. This is a purely nonprofit thing because I wanted the cheapest price. And unfortunately, because the price is low, it invites people, but it's available for free. Mine is available for free on
Mm.
archive. In colors, you can do whatever you want with it. Yours is not available for free, as far as I know, and I think your publisher would not be
Yeah.
excited.
So you want to move on to the second chapter, which is called Ruin Problems.
Yeah,
And
that's the central notion is that it,
yeah,
we started talking about Mark, Universa, our history and tail hedging. That's not um, I mean that's important, but the root thing is ruin because basically
mhm,
you're ruined, you can never come back, and
right.
a lot of positive expected return include ruin, and the problem is a lot of these methodologies are wrong. So let's go.
Yeah. And that's what you wrote about in the pandemic note was this is a ruin problem. And if you keep playing this game over and over again, kind of like Russian roulette, you will face ruin. So you
Exactly, it's not
can't
sustainable.
play that game.
To use modern
And I
term,
quote how you've been warning about this for a long time, and in the Black Swan you wrote so this is going back 13 years before COVID. As we travel more on this planet, epidemics will be more acute. I see the risks of a very strange acute virus spreading throughout the planet. Um, so obviously something that you've been focused on for a long time, and the Black Swan, it's about fat tails. So in this paper, which is called the January 2020 paper, systemic risk of pandemic via novel pathogens, coronavirus. I describe it as a single page screeching alarm bell that urged swift sweeping action to halt the disease in its tracks. And you wrote, clearly we're dealing with an extreme fat tail process owing to an increased connectivity, which you had written about in the Black Swan, which increases the spreading in a nonlinear way. Fat tail processes have special attributes, making conventional risk management approaches inadequate. And I think that, you know, uh, what maybe you and Yanir talked a lot about this during the pandemic. I think what the approach by most authorities was conventional risk management approaches.
exactly.
Uh,
So let me go back a little before that. And let me let viewers or listeners know that I haven't read your book simply because I can get myself, emotionally to read stuff written about me. Okay, so
okay.
so I know
Well,
your
we'll
book,
go over it
chapter
and
titles.
today, and
Yes,
you'll
so
learn
I
more
know I
about it.
say it, because I mean it's an excellent book. My friends read it, I commented back, but it's a very important book, actually. As it's too important to put the title "How Wall Street Traders Make Billions in New Age," because it's not about making billions. It's about the survival of the planet. It's about precautions, but many more things. So,
Yeah,
uh,
I agree. I
yeah,
agree. It's about much more than that. It's
yeah. I'll let you go. Go ahead.
yeah, well, like I was saying, it seemed like the authorities in charge of the reaction to COVID in the US and a lot of other places did take conventional risk management approaches,
Yes,
and it really broke down. I mean, in the US, we ended up in this stupid debate about quarantining and opening up economies, and you know, not realizing that it wasn't government mandates that were causing people to stay in their homes. It was their fear of dying.
so yeah,
Uh,
so a little bit of background. I want to say that Benoit Mandelbrot was concerned about wars and pandemics.
mhm.
But we never did an analysis because you can't really use the models, the early models, because you need infinities and you don't
Not
kill.
enough data.
Yeah, so you have a finite number of people on a planet. We had to make some adjustment, and really nobody tested. And a few years before the pandemic, Pasquale Cirillo and I tested wars and realized that wars had very fat tails, very, very fat tail, much, much more than finance, much more than anything.
Hmm.
And it was, and then we had a little fight with Steven Pinker, who said that we live in some kind of great moderation. There's a Bernanke theory of great moderation that it applies, to wars. And
I think I was the first one to tell you about the Great Moderation
yeah, you were that's true. And so
a
they
long time ago.
it's that kind of establishment I call IYI. They always get everything wrong because they have the simplistic first order model in their head. Then we said that the inter-arrival between large wars is of the order of 100 years. Okay, so you need many, 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 many centuries to figure out if the world is better. Then, okay, after that, we uh, we considered pandemics, but there was no big motivation. But when the pandemic
Mhm.
started, I realized quickly that epidemiologists had no idea how fat tail works. They're really using primitive statistics, very similar to economists. But luckily, we were quick at finishing a paper and submitted it to Nature Physics. That's sort of like it's a top journal, right, for its
Very elite.
discipline
Yeah.
and in general. So after we published in Nature Physics, we were able to convince people of the of the risk in our method. So, but it all started with Mandelbrot, conversation with Mandelbrot. When one day in Scarsdale sat down and looked at, hey, what are the things that people don't talk about that are fat tail?
Hmm.
I was
Okay.
invited to Black Swan, and they said pandemics, wars. So it started with the great Mandelbrot.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get to Mandelbrot. There's a section about your first meeting with him actually
Oh,
at NYU. Um,
interesting.
so
Yeah, hold
whether
on, hold on. Let's skip a little bit. Let me.
uh,
So, what chapter is that? My
it's
first
let's
meeting.
see, it's the chapter 6,
Okay.
the Turkey problem
Oh, okay.
is the title of that one, and it has the your first meeting with Mandelbrot and your first meeting with Danny Kahneman, which I think were in the same year, 2004.
No,
Um,
my first meeting was Kahneman was
Kahneman was in Rome,
2002 in Rome after
2002. Okay.
September 11th. And my first meeting with Mandelbrot was in
Oh,
2001,
that was 2001.
after
That's right. Yeah,
September 11th. I mean, within 6 months of one another.
that's right. Yeah. Um, yeah, and I mean, you know, I'm not sure if people realize how critical he was to your thinking, but it was sort of a light bulb going off moment for you when you met him and he was describing the use of fractal geometry and
Exactly,
applying it to
because
geometry.
it turned black swans gray. Whereas in
Mm,
my mind, I wasn't I didn't have the nuances. It was white or black swan, and I realized that there were events that are tail events that are perfectly consistent with the statistical property.
mathematical properties.
If you use the right models, and
Mm,
that was the fractal idea by Mandelbrot.
okay. Uh, so back to the pandemic. Something you put in that paper, and then you and Yunir Baryam come back to uh, is this idea, very simple idea of risk management, risk approach to these kind of situations, which is panic now and panic early. And I think it's a key approach to this, and even I think about universe that strategy in a way is like panicking early,
Yeah, it's perfectly
panicking
right.
all the
Yes.
time in a way.
You know,
Uh,
the best way to buy an option is if you have absolutely no reason to buy it.
mhm,
Because if you have any reason to buy an option, it's going to be too late.
yeah. So you're always early.
You
You're
always have
early,
to,
early, early, and then something
always
happens.
have to.
Yeah. So and this is counter to an approach that a lot of authorities were taking, which was you know uh, wait and see. We don't have enough data to really know, and you saw this from WHO and others,
Yeah, but
was
the
we
wait
need to
and see
wait to
works.
deal with this because we don't know enough about it.
Yeah, the wait and see applies to thin tail process.
Right.
Multiplicative processes, by the time you see it, it's going to be too late.
Yeah, exactly. Um, this leads us into a bit into the precautionary principle, um, which we'll talk about. There's a whole chapter about that. But it's I noticed that this is something that was mentioned in that paper, and at the time, Susan Weber, she writes under the pen name of Eve Smith for Naked Capitalism. She wrote, it says something not good at all about the state of medicine, public health, and the leadership of Western societies generally, that it's Taleb who's been speaking relentlessly and largely alone about the importance of the precautionary principle. Um, Everybody else, at least a lot of, the leadership and public health authorities, weren't thinking about the approach to dealing with the risk of a pandemic under the aegis of the precautionary principle, which is basically, when you have ruin problems, you need to address them, as you said earlier, in the egg. You need to kill it in the egg. You need to panic early. So could you talk a bit about that? Like,
Yeah. Go ahead. You want me to talk? Okay, so
yeah,
this whole idea of the paper on precautionary principle started with, I think, a chain letter. I don't know who initiated it, but I was Brian Eno, the
Brian,
musician, sent me a letter. Okay, and I responded to the letter uh, with the formulation, the early formulation of the precautionary principle, which existed, but made no distinction between thin tails and fat tails. So, in other words, if you have to be cautious about everything, you're going to be paralyzed.
yeah,
So, the whole idea is to
the key
say
distinction.
there's a key distinction that there is a difference between a process, say, for example, a process of natural slow selection, not too far from the origin, and GMO, where you skip steps, okay? And there's a key difference between,
Genetically modified organisms.
for
Hmm.
example, yes, between things that are multiplicative and things that are not multiplicative. So I wasn't that worried about nuclear as I was about GMOs because they, can go out of control, whereas the nuclear is very risky, and you know the risks, okay, or you may underestimate the risks, but then it's not gonna spread to the whole planet unless there's a nuclear war, and that's part of war, not part of nuclear. So that distinction between processes that are the first thing, processes that are multiplicative and processes that are not, fat tail versus thin tail. And the second
Mhm.
distinction between things that involve ruin at a higher layer. Like, for example, I don't mind dying, all right? I have progeny, I'm going, my shelf life is not infinite, okay? Whereas I mind if there's an extinction of all humanity. So you got to work at the top layer, not the bottom layer. And the
Yeah.
common mistake is if you ask an economist what's the worst case scenario for you, she or he would tell you, or my death, because that's how their models work. No, something worse than my death is the death of myself, my family, the ecosystem. So there are layers. So you have to be uh, more cautious about the higher layer that is renewable and that non-renewable versus the lower layer, like you. I am renewable. I am a renewable thing. I'm a human. I'm gonna, I just have a shelf life, but I, uh, multiply. Okay.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Well,
so,
and
so I
that,
don't
that
have to worry about my death. I have to worry about the death of some higher up entity, namely humanity, or whatever, or community.
yeah.
So these are two concepts were not present in the precautionary principle. It was not rigorous enough. So we wanted to inject these. GMO was just a
And
side
that's why
product,
you call it a non-naive
non-naive
precaution.
precautionary principle. Exactly. Because
Yeah.
I have seen my irritation comes more from people who are overly cautious than from those who are reckless. And but there is no way to explain that the Greeks, for example, that they had precaution, prudence as one of the virtues, but they also had courage as a virtue. But visibly, you have to be courageous about things, all right, and exert prudence about other things, right? So in other words, the and what are these things? You have to be courageous about your own life when it comes to your own
Mhm.
life, but exert prudence when then the life of others or life of community.
Right. Right. And taking it at the personal level with a pandemic, if you slip in the bathtub and break your arm, that's a risk you can take for yourself, but it's not going to keep you from going outside and talking to your neighbor.
Yeah,
But
the
if
scaling,
going outside and talk to your neighbor presents the risk of killing your neighbor, then you need to be cautious.
exactly what you
It's a
said
different
is,
form of risk.
yeah, it took me a while to formulate it clearly because sometimes you have ideas, but and they're coherent, but takes a while to find the perfect formulation. At the beginning of COVID, we said the risk of dying in your the thing of dying in your bathtub, okay, is higher than the risk of for one person, higher than the risk of dying from COVID. But
Yeah.
for a million people, the risk of dying in a bathtub, okay, is much lower than dying from COVID. So in other words, the aggregate is has risk. Why? Because if I drown in my bathtub, my neighbor isn't more likely to drown in her or his bathtub.
Right.
If I die of COVID, my neighbor is more likely to die of COVID.
Right. Okay. Um, so on to chapter 3, um, which is called Worse Lies Ahead. There's a lot of sort of gloomy chapter titles in this book. Um, and into this, I get a lot into the macro situation in the world and how, at the time at least, and I think there's arguments that there's structural reasons for this, that risk is increasing and magnifying and overlapping in ways that can create more risk, cascades of events. I in this book I write about a lot about climate change and global warming and which is it's something I write about for the Wall Street Journal, so it's on my mind. Um, but one of the questions I try to get at is, you know, how do we think about risk management with these with this world that we live in that seems increasingly risky, and you've written about this going back to the Black Swan. Um, and I pose the question, can preparing for black swans looming on the horizon, even if we can't see them coming, protect us from their most harmful effects? And that's a question I'd put for you. I mean, it seems like Universa does that for stock portfolios, but what about more broadly? Uh, it's one of the uh, central characteristics of black swans is that you can't see them coming. They're not gray swans, and maybe you'd want to put gray swans into this category, but is there is and maybe precautionary principle is a way of thinking about it, but uh, should should we be thinking more hard, more specifically, society writ large about how to protect ourselves from these unforeseen events?
I mean, you spend a lot of money. We spend this country spends $1 trillion on the military. That's risk management. I mean, the military is not something you spend money on for entertainment. You see,
Mm.
so visibly, there are some
Yeah.
classic risks that
The U.S. has a tendency to take its military and create more risk sometimes.
yeah, but yeah, that's one of the tragedies of unintended consequences. But so people are willing to insure against a lot of events if it makes sense to them. They're
Mm.
not willing to insure against events that don't make sense to them, and these are the ones that are cheapest and easiest to insure for. So, in my treatment in the inserto, the way I have dealt with the issue is by trying to find very easy methods, uh, to mitigate the impact of tail events without having to understand what they're going to be. So, nature gave most humans, even people in DC, I assume, you still live in DC now, no? Yeah, people in
Yeah,
DC
just
who are
outside of
born
it.
in DC also have two kidneys, no? So it applies to DC. So having two kidneys, why do we have two kidneys? You only need one. And economists would find one redundant.
Right.
But if you have two kidneys, you don't have to predict what can cause you to lose one of them. Whether it's your cousin trying to hit you with a stick, whether it's I don't know, cancer, or it's a wild animal, or it's whatever, some necrosis due to whatever. So there's seven
Mm.
or eight causes. We don't really care. We don't have to predict them. We don't have to understand the environment. So there are things
I mean,
called
there could also be behaviors and approaches to avoid that could mitigate risk, which is, optimization of systems, which is something that, I think that exists in economics and quants
yeah, that's
formulas, which creates things that you've talked about, brittle uh, versus what's the opposite of brittle? Is you wrote a book about it,
anti-fragile. But
anti-fragile.
first we need to get to the robust. So I've explained that if you have two kidneys, visibly you're less fragile than if you have just one. Okay,
Mhm.
so optimum is one, but those who have just had one didn't make it to the gene pool. You see, so the idea is to avoid pseudo optimization. There's a mathematical thing that optimization is usually if you optimize on one variable, okay, and it's clearly impossible to really optimize on a scalar without making many more assumptions. on a non-scalar, so on a vector. So if you optimize on one variable, and the problem is it's at the expense of something else. So if one dimension, if one optimize on your cholesterol, I can kill anything in you except lower your cholesterol. You see, so they are things that so you have hidden risks that accumulate when you optimize your own variable. There's another thing also called pseudo efficiency, that driving 400 miles per hour seems reasonable. It's going to be faster, but I think 10
Right.
miles per hour is much faster than 400 miles per hour. Because you're never going to get to destination. So what is a street spot? It's not 400 miles. It's not 10 miles. So you got to realize that you have a nonlinear increase in risks as you know as you go faster. So therefore, you have to stay at a level that is tolerable. There are a bunch of things we can do as a society. For individuals
Hmm.
avoiding tail risks, they're not extreme stuff. And they're well known. They're not black swans. What you have to do is there's three, four rules. Don't smoke. Avoid the sugar. Don't join the mafia. Don't ride a motorcycle. Don't get on a plane not flown by a professional pilot, and your life expectancy is going to increase dramatically, not because of your health, but because of that ruin thing is reduced.
Right. Um, One of the interesting things that you said to me when we were talking about the precautionary principle is there's debate about the precautionary principle. As you know, some people say it's too vague, it's paranoid, it's the enemy of progress.
There are a lot
Uh,
of idiots. There's a lot of idiots. Okay, it's like saying
yeah.
let's take cyanide because trying to stop the spread of chemical products is the enemy of progress. See, you can love progress and at the same time be careful about it. It's like I like to drive
Mhm.
at 400 miles per hour. It makes no sense. Likewise, progress is fine, is welcome, but and often the wrong analogies that you'd have stopped people from developing fire. We're just worried about very identifiable and cataloged classes of risks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
more.
well, it's what I think that it's helpful or useful the categories that you spell out in the precautionary principle, which is, these are systemic, global, and the thing you told me was the precautionary principle lets you relax about local problems. Um, it doesn't mean that, you ignore local problems and dealing with them, but they don't require the same extreme measures of risk avoidance prescribed by the precautionary principle.
Exactly, just like people have the central state, and even libertarians agree you need a strong army or an army. For Mises, he wanted the draft, uh, and it's the same thing for dealing with some classes of risks that we individuals cannot deal with, or collectives cannot easily deal with without some kind of coordination. Wars, and Hayek put pandemics in that class. Hayek, with the inspiration of modern libertarians.
Mhm.
So there are a lot of things that people misunderstand uh, about libertarianism, and a lot of things people misunderstand about how to classify risks, and and what is the role of government. The role of government isn't to nurse you into better I don't know mathematic performance. The community could take care of that. The job of the state is to do things that only the state and only the state can do.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's kind of where there were a lot of fractures and schisms during 2020 and 2021 between people that, you know, either naively or purposefully claim to be libertarians. Uh, they were claiming that the government was infringing on their freedoms by forcing them to wear a mask in a grocery store. or to you know stay at home or shut down your business to try to kill it in the egg. Society in America and some other countries reacted very violently to those prescriptions, and it was sort of like this idea of freedom, personal freedom,
I
uh,
think
as
a lot
opposed to
of it.
society's health.
I think a lot of it has to do with clustering. How people start clustering to opinions, and they're willing to have the government prevent you from driving backwards. I mean, driving the opposite direction on 95, Interstate 95. They're fine with that ban because someone can harm you, but they're not fine with wearing a mask. I don't understand
Mhm.
the idea of, particularly in private places. The grocery store initially, I remember a person went to Costco and said, "I was born in a free country." Well, they're also free to the Costco should be allowed to force you to only shop there if you're dressed in pink with a yellow hat. All right, it's also a free
Yeah,
company. But the point is, people wouldn't understand the second order effect of that if I have a mask, it's not to protect myself, is it reduces the contamination to others. And then been a lot of fake studies and bad studies. We got involved, Yanira and I, separately in studying the studies on masks, and there are a lot of naive statistics involved. But I don't understand why people wanted to just find a reason to avoid the mask. Now, of course, you can't mandate masks, but you cannot ban a business from forcing visitors to wear a mask. Just like in some people in their house, they would like you to remove your shoes, at the door. That's
yeah. I mean,
that's the other
freedom cuts both ways.
exactly freedom
But
works
America
both ways.
is, people want to protest. They want to, claim that the government is forcing them to do things. We had the same thing with the vaccine, which
Is it now that we're going to talk about vaccine, or there's a special section later?
we do get into the vaccine later on, and
Okay, but it's
a
the same
person that
thing.
was complaining about it. So yeah, we can move on to chapter 4, which is it's called the Sizzler. And this is where I start going into the backstory of you and Mark, and this is specifically about Mark. The Sizzler was a nickname that he got trading on the
Oh
CBOT.
yeah, no.
Um, and the part that I think is interesting is something that and anybody who knows Mark knows, is the story of his mentorship at the CBOT by a corn trader named Everett Klipp. Uh, and I think it's interesting how it sort of uh, dovetails in ways with precautionary principle, or you
Well, I
know,
mean, every single trader who survived, and that fellow was an older trader. So if you look at
mhm.
all traders,
He knew how to live and
you think,
trade
yeah,
another day.
sorry,
He knew how to live and trade another day, and the lesson he taught
exactly. That's the
Mark
whole
was
idea. So
you have to love to lose money and hate to make money. It's against human nature, and that's what you have to overcome.
exactly. I mean, and a lot of people have this misconception that older traders don't like risk taking for the young people. No, it's those who survived know which risk to take and which to not take.
Mhm.
I mean, just like
He's avoiding the ruin problem,
exactly. I
essentially.
mean, but look at Buffett. Buffett exerts his precautionary principle in a different way. He says no. If you had any doubt, he says, I'd rather miss an opportunity than have a big loss.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I wrote a profile of Buffett, for his year in 2008. I used to cover Berkshire Hathaway, and I talked to him a lot about this. And the thesis of the story that we wrote, a page one story in the Wall Street Journal, was basically that the smartest moves he made in 2008 were the trades that he didn't make,
There you go.
including, there was a lot of pressure on him to bail out Lehman Brothers. And he told me the story about how he looked at their prospectus and he, read their financials, and he even forwarded me a copy that he'd marked up. Uh, on it, and he just it took him a couple hours, and he said, "No way, I'm not touching this thing," even though Hank Paulson was trying to twist his arm to bail it out.
But he had made a mistake earlier with Salomon Brothers.
Yeah, I mean he
No,
has made a mistake.
he made
Probably learned his
he
lesson
learned
from that one.
exactly.
Yeah, but then he made a pretty good deal with Goldman in 2008. Um, so yeah, I get into the how it overlaps with universe. It says, Clip was teaching Spitznagel this key trait of, panic early, cut your losses immediately. That was the effective lesson that Clip was trying to teach Mark was uh, you have to love to lose money. And that meant if a trade starts moving against you, get out of it immediately. Don't wait and try to get back. Just cut your losses and get out and love to lose. And Mark learned that discipline, and I think that it was something that he had sort of beaten into him when you guys launched Empirica, which was a strategy based on losing a day after
Yeah,
day.
people had difficulties figuring us out, and they still
Yeah,
do. It's fine, but there's enough of a community of smart people who can figure it out, and that's why the business is thriving.
yeah. Well, I mean, Mark talks about it like it's a discipline, and he follows it. He follows the protocol, and he doesn't even think about it. He just says, "This is the way you do it." But it can be emotionally taxing, which I think that you experienced yourself a little bit with Empirica.
Well,
Um,
it's emotionally taxing to have investors who have no awareness of their own utility function. You see, so we'd have investors who would come in and say, "Oh, I'm willing to wait 3, 4 years. We don't care. These are costs of doing business." And then
mhm.
they'll get to the airport. They want to kill time at the airport. They call you up and say, "How did you do today?" From the airport. I mean, the same day. All right,
Thinking
same.
about the
Oh, yeah,
strategy, it's like calling up your insurance broker and saying, "Hey, how do you do on my insurance policy today?"
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So people don't know their own, can't predict their own reaction to small, steady losses. They can't.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that Mark and Universal they deal with even now. Uh,
They do now, but there are ways to do it. If the guy has a package and he's up on his stock portfolio, and
yeah,
she or he, have a higher allocation, then the net effect is positive. You see, because you've invested more, 10% more, 15% more, 5% more. That extra performance on a stock more than covers what you paid.
yeah,
So if you present it to intelligent people, there are a lot of intelligent people out there. This is what we underestimated. That there'd be so many intelligent people who could pick up things.
mhm.
It took us a while to find them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's not that complicated, but uh,
It's
you know,
so I have a. It took me a while to figure out an aphorism. We did Ruri, and every time we come up with rules we didn't think about before. Ruri is a risk summer school. Now we have a summer school for risk taking, not risk management, because we don't separate, as it says, the left ventricle from the right ventricle. So anyway, so uh, and the rule was some people never get it. They never get it. They're very intelligent, but they never
mhm.
get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is there's a mentality on Wall Street which is based on very short-term
Not just
profit
that. It's
making.
not just that. There's some other things. It's that naive empiricism approach to things.
Mhm.
Like, for example, I've explained many, many times uh, to people who do psychology of rational or not, that the worst case scenario isn't the worst case scenario we saw. See, and for example, the tallest person isn't the tallest person you've seen. But they keep coming back and say, "Oh, the worst performance in the stock market has been 22% in one day. But before
Mhm.
that happened,
Yeah.
it was a record, all right? Before that happened, the worst day was 10%. So visibly you don't get that record, okay, exceeded the previous record. So the future records can exceed that. That's what I call it's a fallacy that I document. And some people, you explain it to them, and they can come back like 2 weeks later and tell you, yeah, by the way, I'm investing. There was the worst case is this. That's not the worst case. The worst observed case is not the worst case. Even in a paper was co-authored by Bob Schiller, said, "Oh, the rationality of investing in tail events, given that the worst case was that." Well, I mean, before
Mhm.
that worst case, all right, the
Hmm.
worst case was a lot milder. So, and they don't get that. But we since then mathematically here I explained extreme value theory, how it was born in the Netherlands because they decided that they didn't want to drown. And
Yeah.
there are some sophisticated people on the planet, but some people never get it. And those who don't tend to never get it, one of them is what's his name, Cass Sunstein, the
You wrote a whole
fellow.
book about how bad the precautionary principle is.
No, the guy is a total idiot. He just doesn't understand the difference between observed risk and real risk, silent risk and present risk, or multiplicated, non-multiplicated. In the beginning, he thought that was very foolish
Mhm.
to worry about the coronavirus, and then flipped later for political reasons. So that class of people I call IYI, they all have the same sort of training, social science. Um, they all have the same approach to things, and they all blow up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this idea of sort of unfathomable risk or unforecasted risk is something that we're seeing a lot these days with climate, because it's a moving target, and you have all these tipping points, and people who say, well, we really shouldn't worry that much about it because you have incremental centimeter rises in the ocean every year, and we can manage that. Uh, when in reality, you know, there's no way that people can forecast the risk over years or decades because it's completely unpredictable.
What we can do with the climate is something we keep saying. We even wrote a short one pager, Yanir and I, on it. Is that I know that polluting with 100 units is more than twice the effect of polluting with 50 units. You have nonlinearities. Okay, but
Mhm.
anything that's the fragility theory. Therefore, you got to spread among pollutant. Don't try to forecast because you reduce the risk dramatically if you reduce the number of not if you reduce the number per pollutant. You see
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the points you guys make in that paper, which I do get into in the book, is the uncertainty of models and predictions is a reason to be cautious.
exactly.
Whereas I hear a lot of people say, well, these models are so, all over the place, and there's so many variables and a lot of uncertainty. So we really don't need to we shouldn't take extreme precaution because it's just too unknown. Whereas you flip that on its head and say, no, because
Yeah,
of the uncertainty, we really do need to be careful.
exactly. Look, if someone tells me there's uncertainty about the quality of the water, some people say it's excellent, but others have models that say it could pollute a lot. But there's a lot of uncertainty about the model. What do you do? What should I do? I won't drink it.
Don't drink it.
Some other
Yeah.
water.
I'll try
Have
some.
uncertainty. It's a decision. The more uncertainty in the system, the easier your decision because it's going to be precautionary. If there's uncertainty about the pilot, I get off the plane.
Don't get on the plane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it makes us a decision, and we try to apply it to the climate by saying it is because there is uncertainty that you should probably find some other pollutant for which there's less uncertainty.
Yeah. I mean, that's something a lot of people don't get is risk management is often about managing uncertainty.
A lot of
And
risk managers are people who've never really taken a risky decision in their lives, and so they're not selected. Like business people are selected, otherwise, if they're slightly incompetent, they go bankrupt. I mean, they can go bankrupt or be incompetent, but the incompetent people eventually go bankrupt. And risk management, no, because they write papers and they're not part of the return, which is why they have no incentive to improve.
Yeah. Well, having covered Wall Street in 2007 and 2008, I definitely
Yeah.
saw where risk management did not work very well.
By the way,
But
they still
I
use
guess what?
this. By the way, they still use the same methods
Yeah, I know.
on Fannie Mae. You go
They
check on
use
Fannie.
value at risk still. I can't
Oh,
believe it. I
yeah,
mean,
go check on Fannie Mae.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
There was this brief window where people were like, "Oh, bar is shit, and we're not going to use it anymore." And they're like, "Oh, well, it actually we kind of like it." And uh, so I want to get one more chapter in before we cut this off. The chapter following the Sizzler, chapter 5, which is you might like this one or maybe not. It's called "The World According to Nassim
Oh,
Taleb."
I don't like that. Yeah.
So I get into your background, but it's actually the chapter title comes from an article in Derivative Strategy that I don't know if you remember this, but in the 90s there was this article called "The World According to Nassim Taleb,"
Mm.
and in it you start talking at least on in you know the recorded history of your thoughts on derivatives and risk. Uh, you start talking about your concerns about these models. And there's a question, it says, what problems do you have with financial engineering? Uh, and you said some folks looked at the literature and saw differential equations and said, gee, that's like engineering. Engineering relies on models. You can capture the relationships in the physical world very well. Models in the social sciences serve a different purpose. They make strong assumptions. Economists have known for a long time that math in their profession has a different meaning. It's just a tool, a way to express yourself. And then there's another question, and you say in finance, you're not as confident about the parameters. The more you expand your model by adding parameters, the more you become trapped in an inextricable apparatus of relationships. It's called overfitting. So it seems like this is where you're beginning to develop your skepticism of models. You probably had sort of an instinct that the models didn't work before, but you're working on your book uh, at the time called Dynamic Hedging, and that's what this article is a review of that book.
Okay.
So
So
could
no,
you talk a little bit about like how you started getting to be
I had no, no. I had a
skeptical of
very
these
clear
models?
idea. I had a very clear idea which models don't work, and it's models with second order effect not captured by the first order effect of the model, and that's the topic of dynamic hedging. And the whole idea of dynamic hedging is showing you directionally where the models don't work. So, for example, if you use Black-Scholes, you underestimate out of the money options. Why? Because if you perturbate volatility, okay, you got a higher valuation. So it's in that direction.
Mhm.
That was the whole topic of dynamic hedging, which 27 years, 20 was 1996, November 1996 to today is a lot of years, 27 years.
Yeah.
Almost 27 years later, it's still being used and doesn't need refreshing. So it was directionally. So I knew which models didn't work. Like, for example, correlation is not constant. You put it as
I mean,
constant.
did you learn that from experience, seeing how
No, because I started
trading
trading
worked, or
before.
was it more mathematical, or you're just
No, I
instinct?
started trading before using the models. And then I saw the
Yeah.
model. I say, what the hell? This doesn't matter. So when you go from trading to theory rather than reverse, you observe a lot of things that you wouldn't otherwise. The problem is once you have an idea in your head, a model in your head, it's very hard to get it out.
Right.
Same
Yeah.
thing
And
with Marx.
that's the quants that study in universities, they
Exactly.
learn the models first and then they start trading.
Exactly. Mark started traded and then went to do the Quran and started, of course,
And you
causing
read your book.
yeah, but causing trouble there with I remember with another professor who was just a mathematician, who had absolutely no idea what Mark was talking about, and I understood perfectly where Mark was coming from, and I was laughing.
I could have used that anecdote in the book. And for people who don't know that, in this chapter, I describe Nassim's trade on Black Monday in 1987, and really the day after Black Monday, when he made these astronomical, sort of quantifiably impossible returns
20
on
standard deviations for
Eurodollar options.
yeah, 20 standard deviation is a monstrous move. And actually
Yeah,
more than 20 standard deviation, according to whatever deviation was preset before the event.
yeah,
And again, I mean, when people ask me at first Boston, how did you see it coming? I told them I had no idea. I had no
right.
idea what was coming. It was just like these options to me were cheap for
Yeah, there were options that you bought for pennies that
pennies.
ended up selling for 400, $500, right?
Yeah,
Something like
yeah,
that.
yeah. Nothing. Yeah, the returns were monstrous, but has happened to me before. The way I discovered it was an accident. Is that we had a 10 standard deviation in currencies from the Plaza Accord in 1985, and I was just beginning
Yeah.
the trader, and the tiny residual options went up in value. So I said, "What the hell is this?" There's non-linearity to the tail. So all you need is have an event like that every 30, 40 years, and you're fine.
Yeah, that was Indo-Suez.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
get
this
into
was,
that a bit. And
oh, really? Oh, okay. All right.
your
Sorry.
boss started calling you the Bobby Fischer of options.
Yeah, that was, yeah, they thought it was skills. It was just like identifying a very simple attribute, and you don't have to be smart about anything else.
Right. And I think Mark was sort of him on his own discovering similar attributes.
Anyone, I mean, I
Right.
think it's biological. When people tell me it's experience-based biological, because a lot of people have my same background, war in Lebanon, and 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 there's basically no option that they see that they don't want to sell, right? So it's not background, it's not having gone through civil war or anything. It is
Mhm.
just, I think it's about some people think in a certain way, and these people end up, getting together.
Yeah, I try to avoid drawing that connection. I say your early life provides few clues to his unlikely future as a Wall Street derivatives trader,
Now,
best-selling author, and cosmopolitan jet setter.
sorry, and what? Sorry.
Cosmopolitan jet setter.
No, no. I mean, my early life provided me with a love of books and love
Yeah.
of conversation with erudite people, particularly the Jesuit priests who used to hang around my father because these guys had can talk about things. I was a guy like would be teaching surgery, cardiac surgery 1 year, and then the next year they're teaching Greek grammar or Aramaic. Uh, 101. You see, so they were very erudite. So that's what
Hmm.
my previous life provided me with a love of books and love of you know
Yeah, I get into that. I'd
but
say,
not this belief in precaution and stuff like that.
yeah, I say, you immerse yourself in books, philosophy, Hegel, Marx, Toynbee, fiction, like Graham Greene, The Berlin Diary, by William Shire.
Yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
have actually my Graham Greene here. I have like one, two, three, four, like 30. I think like 25 of them. Right,
mhm.
right. And this room is
Yeah,
not.
he's one of my favorites too.
Sorry, really? Uh, yeah, but no, that was still. It's not the novels. Novels are fun to read, but they don't contribute as much as history books.
Yeah, I go back and forth between the two. I'm right now more into history, but sometimes I just love reading fiction. So do you think should we cut it off here?
Let's let's uh, let's
Uh,
uh, let's take a break and let's.
we get into the founding of Empirica
Oh, okay.
next.
Let's take a break and then come back to the next session Thanks a lot, Scott.
Thank you, Nassim.